What's going on, everybody? It's a beautiful December day, about 40 degrees out, but the sun's out. It's not raining. So let's get some work done on these heads. Now that these heads are finally fully assembled, the cams and buckets in them, it's time to gap my cams or figure out what bucket size I actually need. The cams are installed and everything's torqued down to specs. So it will be, now I need to check for clearances. I'm going to check for my clearances, and this may or may not be the right way to do it, but it's what I have and it's cheap and easy. I have the buckets already. So why not just grind them down? They're all too big. So I'll just grind them down a little bit on the drill press. Grind them down and then fit them to size. And that's how I'm going to gap these. Now the measurement on the bottom of them won't be the same anymore, but that should never matter again. I shouldn't be needing those anymore. I'll scratch them out. I'll try to scratch them out so I remember, but just in case. We'll get started on that stuff, but first up, we got to figure out our gaps. So we'll figure out our gaps, and I completely forgot to write down what bucket was in where on the passenger head. Did the driver's side head, but not the passenger side head. So that way I can measure and figure out my tolerances from that, and I'll show you guys that in a minute. So these are all the bucket sizes for the intake and exhaust on this passenger head. And I gotta go ahead and do the driver's head. When I pull them all out, I'll write them down, but I'll figure out the gap while it's all put together. So I'll gap them and then I'll pull them out, and on the bottom I'll show you that it has a little marking underneath it that says all these, like 505, 509, 499. It has all those markings on it, and that's how thick the bucket is. Since I don't have a micrometer that's used for this, I'm going to use a subtraction method. So I actually have a vernier caliper that's digital, and it can give me a readout and give me my readouts. So I'll have a known, and then I'll subtract it, and that should be the gap that I actually have for the buckets. And the buckets are a circle. It's like a cup. The buckets look like a cup, and they sit in there, and they're upside down like this in there, and you can see the tops of them. So that would be the bottom of the glass is right there, and it goes down. Now the buckets aren't tapered like glass, they're straight up and down, but you want to measure the thickness of between here and this base. And that's the part your valve will sit in there. Your valve will sit in there like, see if I can do this. Valve will sit in there like this. And you want to measure where the valve touches and where the cam touches. So you got to measure this piece. So we'll take something that we know and have that be our known, and then we can subtract this. So we'll have a known rod that will stick probably out a little bit past here, and we'll have that known measurement, and then we can measure from the end of the rod to the outside here, subtract the rod, and that will give us our bucket depth. I've got a bunch of different options of stuff to use here. So this is a valve, an old valve guide, and I could really use this because it will fit in there, and I think it's long enough, and I don't want it to be sticking out like way past and have to measure a whole bunch extra. I want to measure just a little bit extra. So I'm going to pull the buckets out and see where that, how thick it actually is, and go from there. But I don't think I want to use this valve because it's got a hole in it. And when you're trying to center it on the button in there, it could be off a little bit and it will give you a false reading. So I don't think I'm going to use that. It might be an option if I need to, but I don't think I'm going to use it. I thought about using bolts, but there's a couple things that you would have to fix on a bolt. This would be perfectly fine to use, but if I was going to use it, I would take down all these little ridges, because if one of them's on it sideways, it'll give you a false reading. And then the other is your thread pitches. You gotta watch out. You can see how uneven that thread pitch is. So I would flatten both of these sides to use a bolt. But you gotta be careful what bolt you grab, because this one actually has an indented head. That'd be great for setting it on there. If I have a piece, just set it on there, that way it centers itself and it's always stuck with it. But there's that 7 in there, or yeah, 7, that'll be raised that will give me a false reading. And again, the threads are a little bit, one side's higher than the other. So if you can use it, probably not going to. I found this chunk of steel. I have no clue what it went to, but I could always cut that to whatever size I need, and that might be the route I go. Also found, this is a hex adapter for your bits, and this would work well. I'd put this side down, so this would be my bucket side, and then measure to the top of this one. It's already flat, but there could be some problems with this open side, especially if I mess up and put it down this way. And I found, for the last thing, I found this one. Now I know for sure that the bucket, the part that actually sits on the valve, is smaller than this, or is bigger than this, excuse me, because it sits in the valve and it can't go on the valve. So I think I'm gonna go with this. It's got a little bit of a point. See if it'll focus. It's got a little bit of a point to it, which I can take off, but I might leave it because that will give me my definite area. So I can center it on there and that will give me exactly where it's at. Because it's metal, it won't be pushing into the metal. I think that's the way I'm gonna go. I'm gonna take them out and go from there, decide what I actually want to do, if that's even feasible, or most likely I might just cut this up and make it whatever length I need it to be, so I'm not doing a whole bunch of extra math. Got these valves buckets starting to get clearanced, and here's my clearance specs. My intake's supposed to be 79, my exhaust 138. And they also have variances. This is the variance that you want to be between for your gap between the lobe and the bucket. So you just take your feeler gauge, stick it in there, and this is the bucket height. This is the gap between the bucket, and this is how much I need to remove off of this bucket. So I'll take this number, subtract this, and that will give me my end value that I need to measure. So that's how that's going to happen. But when you're doing your gaps, I found that it does make a difference having the lobe up versus having it sideways, because sideways you get a different reading than if it's up. And also with these buckets, like this area right in here, makes it hard to get a good flat read on it. So make sure to get a good flat reading, because you can get it like this and you can get it in here like this, it's stuck, and you can see the lobe kind of moving. That means it's not quite this gap and it's running on the feeler gauge. But if you get the feeler gauge flat, it doesn't. So always make sure you're running your feeler gauge flat, and it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of oil on it so you don't scratch things up. This one's the hardest one to get to because you can't really like move it to the side to get around this lobe, and you can't really get it down. So what I was doing is I was pushing down on the front side next to the bucket and then feeling it that way. And you can get real close on what you need to have it as. So this one is 11 thousandths. And that was I'm numbering my lobes 1, 2, 3, and 4, because this will be my front and this will be a known front, which is my cam gears go right here. So each one has a 1, and it's super easy to tell your exhaust port from your intake port, because your exhaust port has studs for your headers, your exhaust, and your intake doesn't. Your intake also has a different shape to the casting than your exhaust. And if you still can't figure it out, it's always beneficial to look at your valves, and your exhaust valves are always smaller than your intakes. Your intakes are always larger. So there's 3 different ways to check to see which cam you're actually working on, and it makes a big difference because your exhaust has twice as much gap as the intake does. So it's definitely important to make sure that you have the right cam that you're working on and you're trying to gap, that you're not working on your intake when you're supposed to be doing your exhaust. Because I was starting out on this one and I was trying to gap my intake on my exhaust before I flipped it around, and my intake is my exhaust is twice as big as my intake. So I was like, why am I super high? I'm gonna have to order new buckets. But it turned out I just had the head backwards and everything turned out okay. Now that that's been clearanced, you need to take these off, you need to take your retainers off, and you take your cams out, and then we can get to the buckets and pull our buckets out, and then we can start grinding on them to make them the right tolerance that we need. Now that we've got the cams off and the journals, we can pull the valve bucket out, and you can see what I'm talking about. So this one is 496. But you can see how deep that button is down in there, and there's no way for me to measure that with the tools that I have, because I can just measure the outside of it and that's it. So I have to come up with a piece to go in there to give me that difference. So going through trying this, that point is giving me too much of a problem. So I just tried to do this using a valve guide. You turn your caliper on, and then we can measure our valve guide. And with it measured, we can zero it, and now that's our 0. So this is taken out of the equation. So we can put that on top of our button and then measure our button plus our valve guide. And that difference if I can get it straight. 4.9. So if we look in the bucket, 496. Now this caliper won't read to that small of an amount, but now we know that that reading is in millimeters, and I actually want my measurement in inches. So I'll have to do some conversions, but if I do it with this way and get my inches, I can figure out if my conversion is close or not. So 0.195 inches. So here's a little contraption I actually came up with. So this is a Torx bit, and you can use any size Torx bit. I found one that's got a pretty good size head on it, and just hot glued it straight to the caliper. And then you set that as your new 0, so you just zero it out, make sure it's all zeroed, and then that's just measuring between the end of this bit and this side. So anything you put in there, you can measure. And I've been grinding down on this a little bit, so now we can measure it, and we're 191, And we come over, we're on our right head, and that is our intake. Number 1, because our cam gear, 1 intake, because this is the exhaust side. So right head, number 1 intake, 191. So that bucket's now ground down to the proper valve clearance. If you ever have any second guesses with these digital ones, it's real easy to get off. But if you ever have any second guesses, just slowly run it back to 0 or back to close. There we go. And it should read 0. See how it has that negative? It's off a little bit. So 0 it out. And then try it again. Just double check. $190. So we're a little bit. Well, I guess I should center it. 191. So it's still on. The whole reason I glued this on here was it was so hard trying to hold a piece in here, then hold that up with one hand, and then the other hand run the caliper. So that just makes it so it's always the same. You don't want to put too much pressure on it, especially lateral pressure, like torsional pressure, because this will pop off really easily. This super glue doesn't stick too well to A, the steel, and B, this material, because it's got a little grease on it, because I've been using it on all this greasy stuff. But we'll take you to show you the process for the next bucket. Once you get all done with this bucket, though, it's very, very important to get all those little shavings out. So we'll go outside and clean it up real quick, and put it in. This is number 2 on the right hand side on the intake. 497 and 497. So we'll clean it off real quick. This is what it looks like before. Clean it off real quick, and then we'll put it in the drill press. This is what I'm using. I've got soapstone in the drill press. Turn it on, and then I can change my depth. But to get it on, slide it underneath, and then we can push down on the drill press and give us the pressure that we need to clean on that. Make sure not to drop all the shavings that you've got in there now on your towel, because the towel is where I'm sliding the top part off. So always make sure to get all the shavings off. You can see how it's nice and shiny now. Now we'll bring this bucket over, measure it, and make sure that we're not going past where we need. Go slow. I'm especially going slow because I don't have any extra, and I don't plan on ordering anymore. So I'm going to go real slow, take my time, and make sure that I get those ground down far enough. So I got this one ground down 1,000th already. I've got 3 more thousandths to go, maybe 2. Well, it's getting really late now, and I finally finished with one of these heads. I've got all the buckets all ground down to where I need them. Now I gotta clean the other cam up and get it nice and shiny. That one's starting to get nice and shiny as compared to the old ones. Gotta get that nice and shiny. I'll reassemble this and then double check my tolerances just to be safe. This method worked great. Slow, which is a gift and a curse, but it worked out really well, and we'll see. I gotta lash these or figure out the gap 100%, but it should be pretty close. There's no reason it shouldn't be. My math is right. So, anyways, that's gonna do it for me. It's getting real late. I'm gonna check out. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Take her easy. Peace. Just finished putting it all back together. Check the lashing, and it's all spot on. It's a little bit, if I was to change anything, it's a little bit too tight still, but I'm well within the tolerances, so you can't ask for much more. I was shooting for 0.0079, and I'm at about 0.007 on all of them. I have one that's about 8, which is perfect. So it's all looking good. That one's done. I got the, was it the passenger side? Driver's side. I got the driver's side to do still. I'll catch up with that tomorrow, and then we're installing these heads. Anyways, take her easy. Peace.